Imagine standing in the middle of a dusty field in the Central Valley of California, looking at a massive concrete pillar that rises hundreds of feet into the air. It looks like a monument to a future that hasn't arrived yet. This single pillar is part of the California High-Speed Rail, a mega project with a price tag that has ballooned to a staggering $128 billion. It was supposed to be the crown jewel of American infrastructure, connecting Los Angeles to San Francisco in under 3 hours. But as you step closer to one of these billion-dollar structures, you notice something small, something seemingly insignificant. A thin, jagged line snaking through the concrete, a single crack. To an outsider, it looks like minor weathering, but to the engineers and political figures steering this massive project, that crack represents a terrifying question mark. In the world of high-speed rail, where trains travel at over 200 miles per hour, there is no such thing as a minor flaw. One single crack in the wrong place could be the technical and financial domino that brings the entire $128 billion dream crashing down forever. Today, we are diving into the heart of California's most controversial mega project to understand why the fate of the bullet train isn't being decided in a courtroom or a ballot box, but in the microscopic structural integrity of its concrete. To understand why a crack is such a massive problem, we have to talk about the physics of speed. When you are moving a train at 220 miles per hour, the tolerances become incredibly tight. We aren't talking about a freight train moving through the desert at 40 miles per hour. At high speeds, even a millimeter of shifting in the track can lead to a catastrophic derailment. The concrete viaducts and bridges that carry these tracks are designed to be perfectly rigid and perfectly aligned for decades. So, when engineers discovered cracks in the support structures of the early construction segments, the alarms didn't just go off. They screamed. These cracks suggest that the ground underneath might be shifting more than expected, or that the concrete mixture itself wasn't prepared for the brutal heat of the California sun. California is a geological nightmare for megaprojects. You have the San Andreas Fault, of course, but you also have the subsidence of the Central Valley. Because farmers have been pumping groundwater out of the earth for a century, the land itself is actually sinking in some places. Building a perfectly level high-speed track on top of soil that is constantly moving is like trying to build a skyscraper on top of a giant sponge. The engineers knew this, but the scale of the shifting has exceeded their models. This means that every single crack in the concrete isn't just a surface issue. It could be a sign that the entire foundation is being twisted by the earth. If that crack grows, the track goes out of alignment. If the track goes out of alignment, the train can't run. And if the train can't run, you have a $128 billion sidewalk. The cost of this project is almost impossible to wrap your head around. When it was first approved by voters in 2008, the price tag was supposed to be around $33 billion. Today, that number has nearly quadrupled. We are looking at a project that costs more than the entire gross domestic product of some small countries. Every time a new crack is found, it leads to a stop work order. Each order costs millions of dollars per day in delays, equipment rental, and legal fees. The project has become a financial black hole that is sucking in state and federal funds with no clear end in sight. Critics call it the train to nowhere, while supporters argue that it is too big to fail. But the math is getting harder and harder to justify. If a single structural flaw requires a total rethink of a section, where does the money come from? Let's go inside the bureaucracy for a second. The California High-Speed Rail Authority is under immense pressure to show results. They have shifted their strategy several times, now focusing on completing a 119-mile segment in the Central Valley first. The idea was to build something, anything, to prove the technology works. But this segment is being built in the most difficult geological conditions. Every pillar they sink into the ground is a gamble. The presence of cracks in these new segments is a PR disaster. It gives political opponents the ammunition they need to say the project is fundamentally flawed. If you can't build a stable bridge in Madera, how are you going to get a train through the Tehachapi Mountains or the San Francisco Peninsula? The technical side of the concrete failure is fascinating. Concrete is great at handling compression, the weight pushing down. It's terrible at handling tension, the force pulling it apart. That's why we use steel rebar inside the concrete. But in the Central Valley, the temperature swings are extreme. The concrete expands in the 100-degree heat and contracts during the cold desert nights. If the expansion joints aren't perfect, or if the steel inside begins to corrode because of tiny cracks letting in moisture, the structural integrity vanishes. This is the silent failure that haunts megaprojects. You don't see the problem until it's too late. The cracks found recently are being scrutinized by forensic engineers to see if they are structural or cosmetic, but in a project this expensive, the line between those two is very thin. Then there is the issue of the sunk cost fallacy. Politicians are terrified of admitting that the project might be a mistake. They have already spent billions. They have already torn up land, displaced people, and built massive structures that dominate the landscape. To stop now would be a monumental admission of failure. So they keep going, hoping that the next $1 billion will be the one that fixes the problem. But the engineering doesn't care about politics. The concrete doesn't care about the budget. If the land is sinking and the structures are cracking, the train is in trouble regardless of how many votes are cast in Sacramento. Let's look at the travel documentary aspect of this. If you drive through the Central Valley today, you see a strange post-apocalyptic landscape. You see massive bridges that end abruptly in the middle of almond orchards. You see enormous concrete viaducts that look like they belong in a futuristic city, but they are surrounded by dust and tractors. It is a surreal sight. This is a journey through a dream that is struggling to stay upright. The scale of the construction is breathtaking, but the lack of activity on many sites is haunting. It feels like a monument to an era that thought it could conquer geography with enough cash. The project is also a case study in scope creep. It started as a simple line, but then every city along the route wanted a station. Every environmental group wanted a specific tunnel or bypass. Every local politician wanted a piece of the construction budget. This turned a streamlined engineering project into a bloated political monster. The complexity increased the chances for error. When you have 1,000 different contractors and subcontractors working on different segments, maintaining a uniform standard of quality becomes a nightmare. Was the concrete at Pillar 42 mixed exactly the same as at Pillar 500? The cracks suggest that maybe the answer is no. We also have to talk about the international context. Countries like Japan, China, and France have built thousands of miles of high-speed rail with incredible success. California looked at these systems and said, "We can do that." But those countries often have very different geological conditions and, more importantly, different legal and labor structures. In California, the project has been bogged down by thousands of lawsuits from property owners and environmentalists. Each lawsuit leads to a redesign. Each redesign leads to a potential weakness in the overall system. High-speed rail is a holistic system. It needs to be perfect from end to end. You can't have a pretty good section of track when the train is moving at terminal speeds. The psychological impact on the public is also shifting. For years, Californians were promised a green, futuristic alternative to the nightmare of the 5 freeway or the congestion of LAX. But as the years pass and the cranes stay still, the enthusiasm is turning into cynicism. People look at the cracks in the pillars and they don't see a minor engineering hurdle. They see a metaphor for the state's inability to deliver on its promises. The bullet train has become the ultimate failing megaproject, a cautionary tale for any other state thinking about large-scale infrastructure. But let's play devil's advocate for a moment. What if they fix the cracks? What if the Central Valley segment opens and it's a roaring success? The planners are betting everything on this. They believe that once people see the train in motion, the funding will miraculously reappear. But to get there, they have to solve the crack problem once and for all. This requires injecting specialized resins into the concrete, reinforcing the pillars with carbon fiber wraps, and in some cases completely replacing the foundation piles. This is surgical engineering, and it is insanely expensive. It adds billions to a budget that is already in the red. The ground subsidence is the true villain of this story. In parts of the Central Valley, the land has sunk by nearly 30 feet over the last century. Just imagine that. The entire valley is collapsing inward because we are thirsty for groundwater. If the track sinks by just an inch every few years, the high-speed train becomes a regular slow train. You lose the high-speed advantage that justifies the $128 billion cost. The engineers are trying to build adjustable track foundations that can be leveled as the ground sinks, but this technology is largely unproven at this scale and speed. It is another layer of experimental risk on an already risky project. There is also the carbon argument. The project was sold as a way to reduce California's carbon footprint, but the amount of carbon generated by the production of millions of tons of concrete and steel is astronomical. If the train doesn't run at full capacity for 50 years, it might never actually reach carbon neutrality, And if the cracks mean the structures have a shorter lifespan than expected, the environmental math falls apart completely. This is the irony of many green megaprojects. The construction itself is so massive that it threatens the very environmental goals it was meant to achieve. Imagine living in a house next to one of these massive construction sites. For a decade, you've heard the sound of pile drivers and seen the dust in the air. You were told this would increase your property value and change your life. But now, you look out your window at a cracked pillar that has been sitting there for 3 years with no progress. You start to wonder if the project will ever be finished, or if you will spend the rest of your life living in the shadow of a concrete fossil. This is the reality for thousands of people along the route. The legal battles over the cracks are just beginning. Whistleblowers have come forward claiming that some of the concrete was poured knowing it didn't meet specifications, just to stay on schedule. The authority denies this, but the presence of the cracks makes the allegations hard to ignore. If it turns out that there was a systematic failure in quality control, the $128 billion might be the least of their worries. We could be looking at a total structural write-off of entire sections of the line. Why can't nobody stop it? Because there is too much political capital invested. To cancel the project would be to admit that a signature initiative of several governors was a total disaster. It would mean returning federal funds and admitting that California, the 5th largest economy in the world, can't build a train. So the project continues in a state of uncancelable failure. It is a zombie project, moving forward not because of logic or engineering soundness, but because the alternative is politically impossible. The crack is a warning. It's like the check engine light on a car that you are driving across the country. You can ignore it for a while, you can put a piece of tape over it so you don't have to see it, but the engine is still struggling. In California, they are putting a lot of tape over the problems. They are rebranding the project, calling it stage delivery, and focusing on smaller goals. But the fundamental engineering reality remains. You are building a high-precision instrument on top of a sinking, shaking, shifting landscape. Let's think about the future. It's 2040. You are standing at the station in Fresno. The wind is blowing through an empty terminal. On the platform, there is a train that hasn't moved in months because a new crack was found in a bridge 10 miles away. The cost to fix it is another $10 billion, but the state is out of money. This is the ghost train scenario. It's a reality where the infrastructure exists, but it's too fragile and too expensive to actually use. This is the ultimate fear of the mega project community. The sheer engineering hubris involved in the California bullet train is something to behold. They are trying to build the most advanced rail system in the world, through the most difficult geography in the country, using a procurement system that is fragmented and a political system that is divided. It is a recipe for a structural and financial mess. And yet, the workers are out there today, pouring more concrete, hoping that this batch is better than the last. The story of the crack is a story of micro problems causing macro disasters. One tiny bubble in a concrete pour. One slightly off-ratio mix. One hot afternoon where the water evaporated too fast. These are the things that decide the fate of billions of dollars. We often think of history being made by grand speeches and big battles, but in the world of infrastructure, history is made by the chemical bond between cement and sand. If that bond fails, the speech doesn't matter. As a traveler, the project is a fascinating sight. You can follow the route and see the bridges. You can see the Cedar Viaduct, a massive, beautiful structure that spans the highway. It looks like a work of art. But art doesn't have to carry a train at 200 miles per hour. Art doesn't have to keep people safe at high speeds. The beauty of the infrastructure is a distraction from the structural questions that remain unanswered. When you look at these structures, don't just admire the scale. Look for the cracks. Look for the signs of repair. Look for the reality behind the rendering. Will the project ever be finished? Most experts now believe that the Central Valley segment will eventually open, but the full San Francisco to LA connection might never happen in our lifetime. The cost is just too high, and the engineering is too difficult. We might end up with a very expensive regional train that serves only a few cities. This would be a massive downgrade from the original statewide promise. It would be like building a bridge that only goes halfway across the river. The lessons for other projects are clear. Before you spend the first billion, you need to be absolutely sure about the ground you are building on. You need a unified command structure that prioritizes engineering over politics. And you need a realistic budget that accounts for the fact that high-speed rail is the most difficult form of infrastructure to build. California followed the opposite of all these rules, and now they are paying the price. The $128 billion bullet train isn't a failure because of a lack of money. It's not a failure because we don't have the technology. It's a failure of environmental, geological, political alignment. It is a project that was designed for a perfect version of California that doesn't exist. It was designed for a California where the ground is solid, the lawsuits are few, and the budget is infinite. In the real California, where the land is sinking and the budget is tight, the project is cracking under its own weight. As you look up at those massive pillars, remember that they are standing on a foundation of debt and hope. The bullet train is a dream that is being tested by the laws of physics. Each crack in the concrete is a whisper from the earth, telling us that maybe we haven't mastered nature as much as we think we have. The train might one day move, but at what cost? And for how long? The answer might be found in a single, jagged line of broken stone in a field in Madera. The story of the California bullet train is still being written, but the theme is already clear. It is a story of hubris, a story of politics, and a story of the relentless power of geography. It is the ultimate failing megaproject, not because it was a bad idea, but because it was an idea that refused to acknowledge reality. And in the world of high-speed rail, reality always wins. The cracks are there for everyone to see. The question is, are we willing to look? If we continue on this path, the bulletin train will be a landmark of a different sort. It will be a monument to the era of grand illusions. It will be a place where students of engineering go to study what happens when you ignore the signs of failure in the early stages. They will point to the cracks and they will say, this is where the $128 billion went. It went into the gaps. But for now, the construction continues. The steel is tied, the forms are set, and the concrete is poured. Every day, California is doubling down on its bet. They are hoping that the next mile will be better. They are hoping that the ground will stop sinking. They are hoping that the cracks are just skin deep. But hope is not an engineering strategy. And as the costs continue to rise and the timeline continues to slide, the crack remains as a silent judge of the entire project. This is the drama of our modern world. We want to do great things. We want to build the future. But we are often held back by the smallest things. A single crack, a single mistake, a single unforeseen geological shift. In the case of California's bullet train, that small thing might be the one that decides the fate of $128 billion forever. It is a high-speed disaster happening in slow motion, a structural tragedy that is being built right in front of our eyes. So, the next time you hear about a new world-changing infrastructure project, think about the Central Valley. Think about the dusty fields and the almonds and the massive concrete pillars. And remember that the success or failure of the project won't be found in the flashy brochures or the grand openings. It will be found in the foundation. It will be found in the microscopic details of the concrete. It will be found in whether or not we had the courage to look at the cracks and tell the truth. Until then, the California bullet train remains a sinking dream, a cracking monument to a future that is still just out of reach. The train might be fast, but the earth is faster. The train might be heavy, but the land is deeper. The train might be expensive, but nature is the ultimate accountant, and it is here to collect. One single crack. That is all it takes to change the course of history. In California, that crack is already talking. We just have to decide if we are listening. The project continues, the money flows, and the concrete settles. It is a journey into the unknown, on a track that might not be as solid as it looks. The bullet train is a paradox in motion, a high-speed journey toward an uncertain destination. And as long as those cracks are appearing, the destination looks further away than ever. A high-speed rail is more than just a train. It is a mirror. It reflects our desires, our failures, and our relationship with the land. If we can't build it, what does that say about us? If we do build it and it fails, what does that say about our future? The cracks are more than just flaws in concrete. They are flaws in our vision of what we can achieve. And as the sun sets over the Central Valley, those shadows get longer, and those cracks get deeper. And the $128 billion question remains. Will it work? Only the concrete knows. And right now, it is showing us exactly what it thinks. It is a story of a failing megaproject that is still being built, a tragedy in concrete. A long, expensive, and very cracked road ahead. Keep watching the pillars, because the Earth isn't done talking yet.